Universidad Carlos III de Madrid is a public university established in 1989 and since then committed to excellence in research and teaching. And it is therefore an honor for us to host this debate and the project that will allow our students to approach fundamental issues related to international security and peace. And that's all from my side. I wish you a fruitful debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carmen. And of course, thank you to the Universidad Carlos III de Madrid for hosting us and to all the students for being here with us today. I also want to thank, of course, the Embassy of the US in Spain, to Sandra and Spencer for inviting us to organize this project, which has been very exciting. As you know, we are turning around Spain in different public universities to involve you, all of you students, young people, in getting to know better what is behind all these concepts of security, of peace, of conflict resolution, and how that affects us in today's world. As Carmen just mentioned, this is just one part of our activity. The other part is a competition. Of course, you are all invited to participate. You know, you have all the rules. You have received all the rules, and they are on our webpage in Es Global. You know that the prize is a very good prize. There will be a prize per university. It's a trip to Brussels to visit the NATO headquarters and other institutions related to peace, which I think is very exciting. I also invite you today to share your thoughts and comments about this session with the hashtag Defensa y Yo. And of course, I also invite you to make questions throughout the chat. At the end of the session, I will gather as many of those questions as possible, and our speakers will answer them. As you know, today we are speaking about security, peace, women, and conflict resolution, and which is a very broad topic, but it's a fundamental topic for our societies. And especially so in our democratic societies. And we are going to do that from different perspectives, from starting with the broad concept of how security and peace have evolved in the last decades, and how that affects that evolution, how it affects our collective and our individual security. But we also want to specifically focus on the role of women in those areas, both in peace and in conflict resolution. And we also want to tackle it from the perspective of a person who's been who has spent her career on the field. As you know, as you have seen in the program, for that we have Felix Vacas, who's has a PhD in law and is professor of international law and international relations at the Universidad Carlos III de Madrid. We have Megan Bastic, who's a gender and security fellow in the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance. And we have Maria Fuentenebro, who has a long experience in peace building and humanitarian aid with the United Nations. And I want to take more time. I want to give the floor to Felix to start telling us about how we understand security and peace in today's world. Felix, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cristina, and welcome everybody to this meeting, to this debate. The first thing I should do is to thank the organizers having invited me to this debate. It's really a pleasure for me, and it's also a pleasure to share the floor with Megan Bastic and Maria Fuentenebro. Thank you. And now to the students, welcome. And I guess some of you or most of you have we all have the opportunity to go through all these topics during the course, during the lessons that we have ahead. Today, precisely, we start the second semester at the university. So we'll meet each other, I guess, in the next days. But now I have 8-10 minutes to to introduce the topic, I'm going to focus on the terms peace and security. As you know, the title of our debate is Security, Peace, Women and Conflict. I'm going to focus on the first two terms, security and peace. I'm going to try to explain briefly the evolution experienced by these two terms on their meaning from the traditional meaning used during the Cold War to the present meaning on peace and security we use in our global international society. Even though both meanings and the evolution on them have followed the same pattern and have the same causes, they share the same causes, I'm going to explain them separately for pedagogical reasons. Let's start with the word peace. If I ask you, what does peace mean? First, I guess you will be a little bit shocked. This kind of direct questions: what does love mean? What does happiness mean? What does peace mean? Are not normal questions you are used to listen to, but after this, probably some of you will raise their hands and say, well, peace is the opposite of war. It's the absence of war. Peace is the absence of violence. And of course, this is a right answer. And this is the first approach to the term, to the word peace. But I'm sure that someone among you will raise his or her hand and will answer something different. Will answer, well, it could be an atmosphere, a context of solidarity, of respect from one each other within that given society. And of course, he or she will be right as well. The first answer, which is a very much clear-cut, short answer, the absence of war, the absence of violence, refers to peace in a negative sense. So that's why we call it negative peace, the absence of war, the absence of violence. However, a different approach is possible and nowadays is needed. The second approach is a much more complex one. It's a broader concept of peace that contains peace in negative sense, negative peace, but it goes beyond it to refer to lots of other different things. And of course, we have a problem in terms of defining positive peace, because it's not as easy as when we try to define peace in its negative sense. We can try to do it by saying that positive peace refers to a context, an atmosphere in a given society where all human rights of all are honored, are respected. We are respectful for all human rights of all. And the important words here are the terms all. All human rights, meaning political and civilian rights, yes, but also social, economic, and cultural rights. And for all, for the majority on that society, yes, but also the rights of the minorities that live within that society. So from this positive approach to the word, to the term peace, we face a much more complex environment, if you want, which includes negative peace, because if a society is at war, there is no peace at all, that's clear, but it goes beyond negative peace. The same we can say about the word security. If we go back to the Cold War, to the bipolar system on the Cold War, we noticed that the term security was used mainly meaning national security, the security of the sovereign states, which mainly implied military security alone. So it was a very narrow, limited meaning of the word security. However, after the end of the Cold War, the beginning of the 90s, and the beginning of in our present situation of the global international society, this short, limited, narrow meaning of the word security expanded into a much more complex, broad meaning. And we started to use the expression human security. And there are lots of different features on human security compared with national security, military security, but I want to focus on two of them. The first one is that while military security, national security refers to the security of the sovereign state, the security of the country itself. When we talk about human security, when we use the term security in meaning human security, we are focusing our interest on the security of human beings, on the security of citizens within that country, within that society, on the security of individuals within that society. So that's the first important difference. But there is a second one I want to underline as well. It includes military security, but human security includes military security for sure, but it goes beyond that by referring to economic, social, health, security, education, etc. So the trip or the journey followed by these two terms, referring to the evolution of their meanings, it is from one traditional, narrow, limited meaning within the Cold War, which, by the way, fitted that context, which was a fairly simple, terrible but simple one, into a much more complex and broad meaning, which is useful in our present global international society, which is characterized by its heterogeneity and complexity in all fields, and especially in the fields of threats and risks to peace and security. And to finish with my introduction to this topic, for sure I will have time to try to explain some examples later on, following the questions of Christina and questions coming from you, students. I would like to quote a couple of documents. The first one is a novel written by Mark Twain in the 19th century. It's called A Connecticut Yankee in the King Arthur's Court. Tells us the story of a Connecticut Yankee, that is to say, a liberal man of the 19th century in the United States that travels in time into the King Arthur's court, into the Middle Ages. And at the middle of the novel, he's so shocked by by the difference of mentality of the Middle Ages, with his own mentality as a liberal man of the 19th century, that he says the following, and I quote, "There were two reigns of terror, if we should but remember it and consider it. The one wrought murder in hot passion, the other in heartless cold blood. The one lasted mere months, the other had lasted 1,000 years. The one inflicted death upon 10,000 persons, the other upon 100 millions. But our shudders are all for the horrors of the minor terror, the momentary terror, so to speak, whereas what is the horror of swift death by the axe compared with lifelong death from hunger, cold, insult, cruelty, and heartbreak?" End of quotation. You see, in this text, Mark Twain shows us the difference between positive peace and negative peace, the difference between military security, national security alone, and human security. There is no, I don't know best way of explaining the difference than using this text. And now, yes, to finish, Christina, I want to quote the Secretary General of the United Nations, who in his report on human security published in the year 2010 says as follows: "Today's," and I quote, "today's multiple, complex, and highly interrelated threats affect the lives of millions of men, women, children around the globe. There's such a natural threats, such as natural disasters, violent conflicts, and their impacts on civilians, as well as food, health, financial and economic crisis, tend to acquire transnational dimensions that move beyond traditional notions of security. While national security remains pivotal to peace and stability, there is growing recognition of the need for an expanded paradigm of security. This expanded paradigm of security that the Security Council is the Secretary General, is referring to is human security. So thank you. I think I have limited my introduction to these 7-8 minutes you asked me for, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Felix. Very interesting overview of the topic, and I think everyone can know what you're talking about, since as you explained, security meant something several decades ago, but just 10 years ago we were suffering a terrible financial crisis, and we realized about the importance of economic security, and now we are suffering this awful health crisis, which nobody thought about a security issue before. So it's right there with us. Now I'm giving the floor to Megan, so she can explain us how this is affecting women and how these concepts are applied to women and how they have evolved also for women. Megan, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christina, for the introduction. And I'd like to also thank the US Embassy for inviting me to be part of this session. And to say hello, students, it's a real pleasure to be here with you. I am sitting in Scotland, where it's been snowing, and it's really nice to connect with you in Spain. And I'm really looking forward to the questions you have and the discussion we're going to have. So thank you very much to Professor Vakas for his introduction to human security for us. I have to say, I'd not heard that quote by Mark Twain, and I just love it. It is so useful in explaining these concepts. So you've heard about the emergence of the concept of human security. And in thinking about the Women, Peace and Security agenda, I'd like you to question whose security is privileged in the notion of human security how does human security take account of the different security needs of different groups in our communities and the different power and resources, in particular between men and women? So these were some of the questions that women's rights organizations working with and around the United Nations system were asking in the 1990s. The violence and wars in Rwanda, Bosnia, Northern Ireland, the Middle East, Asia, South America, elsewhere in the 1990s had really obviously gendered impacts. Perhaps the thing that most springs to mind is the widespread sexual violence that we saw in many of these conflicts, but also trafficking of women, huge upsurge in prostitution in areas where there were peacekeepers deployed, women's poverty, impacts on women's healthcare, and then women's exclusion from the peace processes that followed. So really a situation where at the end of these conflicts, the armed men who many perceived had started and perpetrated the conflicts sat down and negotiated with each other, and women's representatives and women themselves were almost never around the table. So women's rights and peace advocates together mobilized in the 1990s around the United Nations Security Council, really seeing the UN Security Council as the focal point of international approaches to peace and security. They achieved success. In October 2000, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. And since, the UN Security Council has adopted a further 9 resolutions on this theme of women, peace and security, which are now collectively called the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, or the WPS Agenda. Now, as you can imagine, there are 10 resolutions. They address a lot of different things at different levels of detail. But broadly, one can say there are a number of goals or themes through the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. Firstly, to promote gender equality and to strengthen the participation of women in decision-making in all aspects of conflict prevention, peace processes, peace operations, and peace building. So for example, there's many organizations now working on women mediators, women in peace processes, deploying women into peacekeeping, etc. Secondly, the agenda focuses on protection, the protection of women and girls in conflict-affected environments. And there are a number of resolutions specifically on conflict-related sexual violence, prevention, ending impunity. And thirdly, to more generally ensure that international engagement in conflict-affected environments addresses the specific needs of women. This is sometimes called the relief and recovery pillar of the resolutions. So looking at things like humanitarian aid, but also processes like security sector reform that might follow conflict. These Security Council resolutions on women, peace and security have really been taken up by civil society around the world to call for change, for gender equality, for peace, for gender inclusive processes. 89 states and a number of regional organizations, including the African Union, the European Union, OSCE and NATO, have action plans setting out how they will implement their women, peace and security commitments. So Spain was one of the first countries in the world to adopt a women, peace and security national action plan in 2007, which was revised in 2017. And it's helped to drive work in Spain around the women, peace and security agenda, including in your armed forces. We've now just passed the 20th anniversary of this adoption of Security Council Resolution 1325. Around that anniversary, there were a lot of international reviews, discussions, panels involving civil society, and many broadly expressed dissatisfaction at the slow pace of implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So many pointing to a lack of governments to properly resource, to budget for work on women, peace and security, or to really create any accountability within government or within institutions for delivering on the promises. Rather, we see, as the UN Secretary General, amongst others, has recently warned, that in many countries, we see international human rights standards being eroded. We see political violence increasingly targeting women, and we see a real surge of sexist and homophobic speech by political leaders in many countries. Alongside feminist and peace organizations, there is, amongst feminist and peace organizations, there's actually now a growing concern that the women, peace and security agenda itself is co-opted by the structures of militarism that it aimed to transform. So arguing that the agenda itself fails to really address the arms trade or disarmament. And some argue that even the women, peace and security agenda is being used to justify war rather than to end war. So pointing, for example, to the way that violence against women was part of the narrative for invading Afghanistan or Iraq, or for airstrikes against Libya. So even Spanish civil society organizations, for example, have criticized the Spanish National Action Plan, saying that it does not promote a questioning of the patriarchal power structures that lead to the serious armed conflicts on women and girls, or of international militaristic policies. So I think this is a really interesting turn, and it prompts us to think, how does this debate and challenge around the women, peace and security agenda speak more broadly to the challenge of changing our world? How can we achieve sustainable peace? How can we reverse climate change, address global inequality? Audre Lorde, who was a Black American feminist civil rights activist, famously said that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So Lorde herself was challenging other feminists, the feminist academia, for what she saw as a very heterosexual white bias. But her words have, I think, for us, a wider resonance in thinking about the potential for achieving change. Do we work within the existing structures and institutions, which is what feminist groups were trying to do in working with the UN Security Council, or do we challenge them from outside? So if, for example, we want to address sexual violence in conflict, should we best work within militaries, within institutions like NATO, or do we challenge those institutions from outside, whether through politics or through activism? And I think we can come to some of the same questions when we think about other problems like climate change. Can we address climate change without challenging the global economic system that some argue perpetrates it? So I'm broadening our discussion from women, peace and security as an example of how it has raised so many questions for activists about the opportunities and limitations of change within our existing structures. And I'd love to know what you think about some of these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Megan. It's very, very interesting, and it really leads with so many current debates. The debate within feminism, the different factions and the different opinions around where to go. The debate about how to deal with women in conflict, whether we want to see them as victims or also actors, active actors in all those aspects. It's really a fascinating debate, and the women and the backlash against the gender agenda in general in many parts of the world. So it's really fascinating and links directly to our topic. Now I'm giving the floor to Maria, because she's dealt with this on the ground in trying to implement implementing peace building projects in many very difficult countries. So Maria, please share with us your experience.
Thank you so much, Cristina, and thank you also to Universidad Carlos III Es Global overall and to the US Embassy for giving me this opportunity to be with the students here today. I hope a lot of the students are thinking of joining the UN at some point on a peace building or peacekeeping related capacity. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with these amazing panelists. From my end, I would love to share what it is like to be in the front lines in those very complex emergencies such as Central African Republic, Mali, South Sudan, or DRC, serving with the UN. I have myself worked all the way from Guatemala to South Sudan or Sudan on peace building related capacities with UNDP in Guatemala, the United Nations Development Program, also in South Sudan, and afterwards with the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, DPO, and later as a political affairs officer ensuing and trying to guarantee a peaceful referendum of independence for South Sudan. I spent 5 straight years in the field in Guatemala, South Sudan, and then in headquarters, New York, Geneva, and Rome, with over 60% of the time in the field, training militaries about what is it that humanitarians need when we are trying to deliver aid. Just to very quickly mention, today when I refer to humanitarian actors, I will refer to OCHA, the department, the Secretariat department that coordinate humanitarians work, and the humanitarian agencies such as the World Food Programme, UNHCR, and UNICEF. Okay, when we have a complex emergency, we have a UN peacekeeping mission, such as MINUSCA in Central African Republic, Mali, MINUSMA in Mali, MONUSCO in DRC, or UNMISS, now with double S, in South Sudan. We have the blue helmets in the mission. Today, missions have over 70,000 militaries from over 120 countries serving as blue helmets in peacekeeping missions. And peace missions also have civilian staff serving on human rights affairs capacities, civilian affairs capacities, political affairs capacities, or public information capacities. So think of all these huge structures in the field together with UN humanitarian agencies, development actors, and the thousands of NGOs, international and national NGOs, that are those ones doing the real frontline work. Now, peacekeepers, blue helmets, normally have that mandate to protect civilians, to ensure peace, to facilitate that conducive environment to implement a peace agreement, to ensure elections can take place peacefully, to provide physical security, and to facilitate humanitarian assistance. It is not always easy. In the field, not only in Juba, in Bamako, in Bangui, or in Kinshasa, but in Timbuktu, in Gao, in Kidal, in Pibor or Akobo, there are huge dilemmas about how to do this, because a lot of the time, the humanitarian part of the UN, together with NGOs, need to be speaking with non-state armed actors, with terrorists even, so that humanitarian aid can reach those people in need. But that peacekeeping part of the house says it is too dangerous to be there. You should not be there. So that, just to give you a flavor, that a lot of the time, blue helmets say, if you want to deliver this aid in this remote location, you have to go with mission armed escort to provide this aid. And humanitarians say, sorry, I cannot. I need to abide by humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence, which means that if a jihadist or a rebel group see me next to you, just that visible association with an element of the peacekeeping mission, I will be perceived as taking sides, and I may become a target. And I put my staff at risk and the delivery of humanitarian aid to beneficiaries. Hence, those humanitarian actors, if you're thinking of joining UNICEF, the World Food Programme, or OCHA, are thinking about how to stay there and deliver, how to build that positive perception and acceptance of the aid that we are bringing, not only amongst beneficiaries and communities, but also amongst those non-state actors, while the peacekeepers stay a bit one step away. We want peacekeepers to be rebuilding infrastructure, to be providing the assets when we need them, to fly, to provide escorts when we tell them it's okay, it will not damage principled humanitarian action. And we need, above all, peacekeepers to save lives. They need to protect. You may have heard in South Sudan, there were protection of civilian sites when thousands of people from 2013 were fleeing from conflict, and the UN bases had to open up to provide that security. So security and peace are tackled in different manners by the different sides of the UN. And not only that, but I also want to bring a bit of the gender element. When women are involved in peace agreements and in peace building, peace has many more chances of being successful. Unfortunately, of all peacekeepers, not even 5% are women, while they would have a really amazing role because they are the ones that need to be going and engaging with communities and talking to the women and the children in the communities and the youth and finding out what are the issues, what are the peace issues, what are the reconciliation challenges, what are the threats. And women talk to women better. And we need more of those female engagement teams that MINUSCA is, for example, deploying to very remote areas of the Central African Republic to protect those women, to empower them, to make sure one day, if they want, they can be themselves a UN peacekeeper. So just to give you that flavor, that militaries are there to save lives, but that it is very important that the whole Tetris and the puzzle of how they should be protecting civilians and enhancing and facilitating that security and that safe space has to be in a dialogue and in a very honest dialogue with the humanitarian part of the UN family. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maria. You also talked about a very fundamental debates within this area, and the militarization of humanitarian aid has been there for a while, and it hasn't been solved. Let me ask you all, before we take the students' questions, let me ask each of you a question, and you are invited to jump in if you want to comment on the other's answer. First, starting with Felix. We were talking at the end of your presentation about the impact of the pandemic on the security aspect, and we at ESOVAL, we publish every year what it's called the Global Peace Index, which is a study, a research done by an Australian institution, and we translate it into Spanish and we share it in Spanish. And the results have been changing during the last years. We have been seeing a deterioration of the peace environment for the last year, but in 2020 with the pandemic, it has gone a different way, because not just because of the trend of deterioration that we were seeing, but also because all the uncertainties that the pandemic has brought in. What do you expect in this sense? How do you expect that the pandemic will affect violence and conflict around the world?
Well, thank you, Christina. I don't know. It is a really difficult question. What we know is that the pandemic and the different answers to the pandemic that different countries are trying to implement through vaccines programs and so on, have a lot to do with international relations and geostrategy, geosecurity, and in terms of diplomatic policy and influence on different continents, regions in the world. If we limit the vision to the pandemic itself, well, it is really complex, because on the one hand, we are witnessing that the pandemic is hitting stronger to Western developed countries than what is the figures, at least the data at least we have from Africa, for instance, or sub-Saharan African countries. Well, some people say that that's because of the not so accurate data from coming from that countries, but of course other factors such as the level of young or older population we have in Western Europe in comparison with Africa, or in North America in comparison with Africa or Asia, should be taken into account to interpret all those different data. But if you're asking me whether this pandemic is going to change the particular security situation in one country or another, I am not very optimistic on that. Could be it's because we are all too tired of the pandemic. We are all entering the second year on this, and I myself, I am really tired. But my view is really pessimistic. We are not going to change for better. We are not going to learn what we should on this experience, and we are not going to put it into practice because we are not learning from it. That's my view, which is a very, I recognize it, a very pessimistic vision. But just a last idea. Western countries introduced on their security strategic reports, national reports, the question of pandemics as a possible risk to their national security, well, 10 or in some cases 15 years ago. We read the national security document of the United States, of the United Kingdom, of Spain, France, or Italy, or Germany, we can find pandemic as a threat. But they did nothing. And we know that today. They did nothing. They just put it on black and white on their reports as a possible threat in the future. But they did nothing. The question is why? Well, I have a couple of different answers. Probably there will be more reasons that help us to explain the difference between the theoretical approach and the practical, real approach to these. But on the one hand, they didn't even believe seriously on what they were writing on their own documents. And second, and much more tricky, when we talk about pandemics, we cannot put the blame on anyone because the virus has no passport. There is not an enemy to put the blame on. So we cannot take advantage of this threat for our own political interests. I don't know if you're understanding what I'm trying to say. And so they couldn't take any advantage from taking these risks seriously. So they didn't show, consequently, they didn't took it seriously until the risk became true. And now they are, of course. But well, this is what I could say about it. I don't think clashes in South Sudan or Central African Republic, by the way, they are becoming more and more dangerous in the last few weeks, as Maria could tell us, or in Mali, or etc., are going to go better because of the pandemic or after this pandemic. I'm sorry, I'm too pessimistic on this.
You know that they say that pessimistic is an optimistic well-informed, so that's it.
No.
Megan, let me continue with this topic too, because it's also well known that the pandemic has especially affected women in every sense, in pay gap, in increase in violence, and so on. How do you think we can tackle this? Because there's much talking, but being much of this violence being produced in the domestic realm, is it possible to combat it at this very point in time?
Thanks, Christina. Yeah, I think it's very timely to connect our conversation to COVID because, as you say, around the world, we're seeing very different impacts of COVID on men and women. I mean, it should be said that in many, if not all countries, men are dying much more from COVID. The impacts are not just one way, but many countries where they're counting have recorded a huge upsurge in domestic violence against women. And there are these longer term inequality impacts. I think we have seen some really progressive actions on the domestic violence front. So in many of the countries where we as DCAF are working, places like Honduras, Morocco, police have really focused on domestic violence response. Hotlines have been set up, new measures have been set up. So in some ways, COVID has prompted a new investment of resources in domestic violence, which is positive. It can be an opening for security services to think more holistically about gender. But of course, it's a sort of a very negative sort of positive in terms of those effects. And as you say, the economic effects on women and the rolling back of achievements on gender equality in terms of women's careers will take a really long time to address. It's hard to say what the best approaches are. Certainly in a British context, women's organisations are working very much on economic policy, so how to make the post-COVID economic policies ones that work for women, that support the sort of sectors that women tend to work in. So what you often see is major investments in infrastructure, like spending millions of euro building railway lines or new roads, and sort of sectors that tend to be the sectors that men work in, rather than investing in healthcare and education and not only the things that women tend to work in, but the sort of infrastructure that supports equality between men and women. I think the other key pillar is to look at women's participation and voice, whether that's in local councils or in the most senior levels of government. Certainly in many countries, women are very underrepresented, not only in parliament where we perhaps see that, but in local decision-making structures, and part of building back from COVID in a more equal way is looking at how women participate, and of course paying particular attention to minority ethnic women, recognizing that, you know, women and men from minority ethnic and other socially disadvantaged communities are being particularly affected by COVID.
Thank you, Megan. It is, to me, it's always striking to see how we don't learn, because somehow we don't learn. Because as Maria was saying before, it's clear and it's proven that when women participate in conflict resolution, in mediation, when they are an active part of these issues, the results are much better. But now I wanted to ask Maria, Felix was saying about Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and about the unknown effects of, supposed unknown effects of COVID there because of the lack of data. But I've also read and heard that it may be in some countries because of the experience with Ebola, and because there were some networks set up there with an epidemic that didn't affect us, the Western world, so directly, but they it was useful to take some lessons. What do you think? Is that possible? That Africa, some countries in Africa are handling COVID better because they did handle and they did have to fight Ebola?
Thank you, Cristina. Interesting question, and yes, absolutely. Back in 2014, some countries in West Africa at community level were a bit reticent to use and learn and practice all for us these very basic hygiene measures. Not only that, but many communities, of course, didn't even have clean water to wash their hands with. So some capacities were built on that are now being very, very helpful in terms of sensitization towards being very serious about COVID-related prevention measures. What I would love to share from the field, and also because a friend from London told me 2 weeks ago, oh, you know, they are so lucky in Africa because the population is so young that COVID is not affecting them as bad as it's affecting us. And I could only reply to her and say, do you know, because of lockdowns, how many children are being recruited by armed groups? Do you know, because of lockdowns, how many girls are being pushed and forced into early marriage? Do you know, because of lockdowns, how many children are not attending school and hence are not receiving the only meal that they were receiving until then? Not only that, but all the restrictions that we are having as a UN because of COVID means that the UN cannot do its work the way it was doing it until early last year, all the way from peacekeeping to the very frontline delivery of aid. We have to deal with huge restrictions of movement, and we are not there in the front lines as we used to any longer. So COVID is taking a huge toll in Africa. The more difficult the setting, the biggest the toll, because of course of a lack of health infrastructure. But yes, if we want to add that bit of optimism, in West Africa, the lessons learned from Ebola are being useful. I remember back then in Guinea, we had a lot of trouble because it was really hard to explain to local and remote communities how a virus works. They wouldn't believe it. There were all these myths around it and religious aspects. Now this time, we can all as a system together with NGOs and MSF be a lot more scientific about it, and communities are on top of these hygiene challenges. But the challenge is huge. As you said, Cristina, we still don't have figures. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, last March, he very quickly called on a global ceasefire, just knowing how difficult things would get if conflicts as we were seeing them continued, because things were already difficult enough, this time so much more. We had hunger, conflict, now we also have COVID with all these big effects, all these, we are going back so many years in terms of development. Let's not only talk about conflict, open conflict settings, let's talk about Latin America. What have we lost in terms of development? A decade already because of COVID. So just to share that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Now I'm giving the floor to Belen, who has a question. Belen, please.
Hello, thank you very much to all the speakers. It's been a very informative and interesting talk. I had a question specifically for Maria because in many subjects we've seen in depth some of the UN departments and missions and so on, such as the peacekeeping operations or the peace building missions. And meanwhile, I would always wonder what was like the real task of the workers there. Like, are you involved as a peace building worker in the peace building process, like very on the ground, or is it more in the political space, like some, I don't know. I would always have that kind of question, like what is the real task and the real actions that from the UN missions you can do. Thank you.
Belen, thank you very much for your question. I will try to be brief, but also to share enough so that you can make an informed decision soon. I hope that you are already applying to be deployed to South Sudan. So if you went to go for UNMISS as a civilian, not as a military or as a police, there are different bits of work that you could be doing. You could be based in Juba, the capital of South Sudan, and be a political affairs officer at the P2, P3, or P4 level. That would require a lot of writing inputs for the Secretary General report to the Security Council, and that would require daily engaging with political parties to ensure a peaceful implementation of the peace agreement. So this would be the more bureaucratic bit you would be doing if you were a political affairs officer. Now, if what you really like is frontline work, you would be deployed to a place like Bor, which is the capital of Jonglei State, the most violent state of South Sudan for decades. You would be living in a container, 8 square meter container, with no AC and no clean water, just buckets from River Nile to wash yourself a little bit. And every day you would be going out to talk to communities and to mediate as a civil affairs officer to try to get them around a table. First, you would be talking to the women, then you would be talking to the youth, then you would be talking to the men. You would visit the prison of Bor. You would see that there are women there in prison because they refuse to become the fourth wife of the elderly of Bor State, for example, and you would have all this information that it really is really so worrying, and you need to organize. You will have a lot of initiative. The UN is totally understaffed. Don't expect much support. You have to go and say, okay, why did the Murle kill 600 Dinka last night? You need to reach out to these groups of people and try to see how you can establish a peace process. What were the sources of the conflict? Access to water? They were lacking access to water. Can the UN, with the help of the NGOs, build un pozo, a water hole? What are the issues, the root causes of conflict? And how can you in the front line help address them through peaceful mediation? You can also be in board as a human rights affairs officer, and you will be patrolling with the protection of the military to even more remote areas to report on the violations to human rights that are happening day and night in this part of the world. You then come back to the base. You will not have very reliable internet. You need to write your reports, which will go to Juba and all the way to New York and may often reach the Security Council so that the UN can support any intervention to protect civilians, including the use of force. So just to give you a flavor, there are many functions, but also would love to give you a piece of advice today. Even if you love gender, even if you love environment, even if your topic is protection of civilians or public information, be flexible. It is not easy to get in. So if you get an opportunity to do an internship, even in an area of the United Nations that you never thought of, such as a logistic officer, just take it. It will give you a great experience. And once you are inside the house, it will be easier to move around. I never thought of becoming a humanitarian. I always had in mind political affairs. And then it happened that something I hadn't even thought about when I was your age, it became my passion and it became my field of specialization. Thank you, Belén, for your question.
Thank you very much, Maria.
Thank you. Now I'm giving the floor to Leonel.
Hello, thank you very much. The topic of women have been on the scene for a while, and I would like to address the question about this. And I would like to ask the question especially for Ms. Megan Bastic. And what do you think is failing in our society, where women have some kind of protection in law, but we are still seeing the mistreatment of women, especially in this time of pandemic? So what do you think is failing in our society, or in men's especially? Is it lack of education, or is it lack of more severe punishments? Or in general, what do you think can we do to solve this problem? Thank you.
Wow, that's a big question. What are the underlying causes of gender inequality and violence against women, and how do we address them? And I think that's a complicated question that has answers at different levels. So we could look at, relationships between men and women and the traditional family structures, where for many reasons women don't have the same career opportunities as men. I mean, that's in a way the sort of traditional liberal feminist focus, to think that equality will be achieved through participation in the workforce and access to resources and public life. And I think we know ourselves that those changes, we can't achieve changes in relations between men and women without men and women being equally involved. And until men are equally parenting children, men and women won't have equal opportunities in careers. And we all, men and women, need to be part of those changes. It's not just a problem that men need to address, but a problem that as a society we have to work together to evolve toward. But I think there are more sort of immediate, concrete approaches in terms of particularly our economic structures and the way our economies don't work for women, that many of the sectors, as I mentioned before, that women tend to work in, like care and retail and food service industries, tend to be much less paid and less secure than the careers that men work in. And I think there are sort of global dimensions to this question of how our economies work for women. And then there are dimensions also in terms of our political structures of why women don't have so much voice in our societies, and we don't all collectively achieve the sort of change that we want to see. But I think it's really up to all of us to look at what changes we can make in our own lives, our own workplaces, not, thinking again intersectionally how we support those who are less privileged, to create systems that will move toward equality and human rights.
Thank you, Megan. I'm giving the floor to Helen now. I've asked her, she's made several questions in the chat, and I've asked her to select one. If we have time at the end, we will go back to her questions, but so far, please, Helen, make one. And if you want someone specifically to answer it, let us know.
Thank you. Well, I guess I'm gonna ask my first question. In the beginning of this debate, Professor Felix Vacas mentioned the term of human security, and I would like to relate it to the idea of water security, considering that water, of course, is one of the key resources for human subsistence. we know that the human right to water was not recognized until 2010, whereas the human right to food was recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And we know that the lack of water can be used as a weapon in situations of conflict. Therefore, I would like basically to ask how, together with the humanitarian agencies, especially the World Health Organization, how peacekeeping efforts or military efforts are working towards also providing this element of water as a resource necessary, as I said before, for human existence. Also considering in several reports that have been done that the lack of equal distribution of water specifically affects women in African communities, considering that are the women the ones that have most of the time to walk kilometers to get to those water sources to provide for their families and to provide food through them in agriculture, etc. So yeah, basically that's my question. And I mean, anyone can respond. I would actually like to know the perspectives of all of them, but maybe, for instance, Professor Megan and Maria, considering that she might have like a practical experience in this field. So thank you.
Thank you. If it is okay for you, we can start with Felix and then make the round.
Okay. Yes. Let me. No. Yeah, you're right, Helen. Water, fresh water, is basic for human life on our planet, and it is scarce, and it will be more and more scarce in the future, in the near future, because of global warming, climate change. So water is important to explain lots of different things on the field of international security nowadays. And we can see it from different perspectives as well. Of course, from your perspective, human rights, but also from other interesting perspectives, such as geostrategy and the political decisions of powerful countries that are taking positions on these. For instance, just notice that United States has opened 2 military base, permanent military bases in South America. Do you know where are they? They are in Paraguay. Why? Paraguay is not an unstable state. It's not close to, I don't know, Chavez Venezuela or Bolivarianism or so on. So why? Because of water. The Guarani water system is the biggest in the world in terms of freshwater reserves. They are there because of that. So water is important. It is right now. We cannot explain the Darfur conflict in Sudan, for instance, or we cannot explain completely the Arab-Israeli conflict, for instance, without taking into account fresh water. If we come closer, even the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, it is impossible to explain it in depth without taking into account fresh water. And unfortunately, because of global warming and climate change, this is going to be worse and worse in the near future, in the foreseeable future. So yes, you're right. This is a topic we should address, UN should address. international cooperation should address, because it is, and it will be more and more a key question for security, regional security, national security, but international security as well.
Megan, do you want to add anything?
Just to add, I fully agree with Felix that, I mean, this opens the bigger question of impacts of environmental degradation and climate change on communities, which of course are being felt most in the poorest communities around the world. And that has some of the ways that that's affecting women have already been talked about. But again, the importance of participation and consultation is very much emphasized by women's networks. So they talk, and I'm thinking particularly of work I've been reading about from women in the Sahel region who are so affected by water and environment issues, that when international investment comes into their countries, corporations start these big agricultural and infrastructure projects. Often local communities aren't properly consulted. And when they are, often the women aren't consulted because they're not recognized as landowners. They probably actually don't, in a legal sense, own the land. I think it really underscores one of the issues that some of the questions have raised about the role of the private sector, how we create and demand and ensure accountability for better practice amongst corporations, which are, you know, so important in development and are underlying peace and security structures in the world, but operate without so much accountability.
Thank you. Maria?
Thank you for the question. Very interesting, and I would love to bring two examples. South Sudan, during the rainy season, which is during basically half of the year, conflict stops. South Sudan hardly has any roads. It's bigger than France. And to what point does water determine and shape conflict? So in Africa, if we look at any conflict, it's related both to the rainy season and to access to drinking water, both to the cattle, for the cattle, and for the people. Now, the Sahel, climate change, and building on what Felix and Megan have already said, as the Lake Chad dries up, we see how population goes. Water determines population movements in Africa, historically, and more so today. The linkages between climate change, physical security, insecurity, and migration are very clear in the Sahel. So what is the UN and what are the NGOs doing about it? Adaptation to climate change. We need to build the resilience of communities so that they can grow. They can grow the food they need, and they can have the assets they need to adapt and to stop desertification in the Sahel. What has the dry up of the lake meant? More children being recruited by Boko Haram, more girls being abducted. So the linkages between the reduction of the water available and conflict, recruitment, and migration are very clear. What can be done? Adaptation to climate change so that people can have sustainable livelihoods. They are not vulnerable to recruitment or to go into these groups, and so that they don't have to leave their countries of origin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. We have many questions. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to group three of them, and some of them are addressed to one of you specifically, some of them are more open, but we are running out of time. So we need to be more efficient with this in terms, so because we want as many students as possible to be able to have their answers. So I'm taking one from Alejandro Martinez, who says, what is the first step in a mission for building trust with the recipients of aid without having to give up the protection of the peacekeeping soldiers? This is for you, Maria. Then Rodrigo has another question also for you. Is it possible to improve the reputation of peacekeeping forces so the population feels their independence less threatened, perhaps by choosing troops that relate to the population better? And he gives an example. There are reports that female coalition soldiers in Afghanistan have been able to connect better with their local population. And we are also taking one question from Alvaro. Let me find it. Sorry, I moved the chat. Okay. He would like to ask about the role of NATO in the years to come. Many world leaders, such as Emmanuel Macron, have questioned the usefulness or the role played by this international organization. Is there a need to change the alliance agenda, or is its existence a real risk with superpowers such as China or Russia on the front line? So you see, there are different questions. Maybe Maria, we can start with you, but also Megan, Felix, if you want to add something, also for Maria's questions, please, you're welcome.
Thank you for the question. When you do peace building work, trust is certainly the first element that comes into place. Whether you are in the field, in the front line as a humanitarian or as part of the peacekeeping mission, that engagement with the communities and with the non-state armed actors is critical, not only to ensure your security, that of the staff, that of the operation, and that of the beneficiaries, but to be able to be there to deliver and to do the job. Now, let me just very quickly divide it into two parts. If you're a humanitarian, you're likely to have been in the country, your organization, for the last 30 years. So you already have that acceptance and positive perception of the communities and of the groups. If you always respected humanitarian principles of no taking sides, of taking aid to the people that need it most, and of saving lives, you should not have a problem in continuing to do so safely. Now, when the peacekeeping mission arrives and take Mali or CAR in 2013, and you are a new actor on the ground, and on top of that, you have a parallel counterterrorism bilateral military operation, you have to start from scratch. But you shouldn't be hampering and deteriorating those relationships that humanitarians already built. So you need to be very honest when you talk to the communities about your mandate. You are there to ensure and facilitate peace and security for the community. If they see that the peacekeeper has that deterrence role of stopping attacks from jihadists, from rebels, children being recruited, abductions, bombings, you are gaining the trust of the community because they are seeing the result of the peacekeeping mission being present. Now, be very careful when you go for the 10th time to the same group of people to ask them what has happened to them, and they tell you again about something terrible, violations, bombings, losing their relatives, and they tell you for the 10th time, and you don't bring back a result. Careful how you manage expectations. Be very transparent about how the whole chain works, and don't go back again to the same people to ask for the same information. Be a very professional monitor, be very respectful, and always think about the protection and safety of the people that you're talking to when you're trying to build that trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Felix, do you want to add anything? Well, there was also a question about NATO and also about women. So maybe you want to add something there.
Yes, on NATO, just a little bit. Yeah, sorry, it was Alvaro. Yes, Alvaro, this is a really key question. The role of NATO, and it's a question which is on the one hand, very divisive in Europe, as you know, and on the other, it is not a new question at all. It decided to be questioned loudly, at least, since the end of the Cold War, when the enemy, well, the clear-shaped enemy disappeared. What's the role of NATO in our new world, global international society where there are no enemies, no clear enemies, where, as I said at the very beginning, the threats and risks to peace and security, to our peace and security, are of different nature, heterogeneous, interlinked, etc. Is in this new period any role for NATO? And NATO has been working on it since then, and that proves that this is an important question for them, because it has to do with the very future, with the very existence of NATO itself. And of course, after the last 4 years of President Trump in the United States and his own questioning on NATO, things have evolved quickly in Europe, at least within the European Union. And what some professors in universities and some political leaders, but not a lot, defended since decades ago, strategic autonomy for the European Union, we witnessed that important political leaders within the European Union make or started to defend this idea as well publicly. Leaders such as Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron, etc. So yes, this is an important question. I have my opinion on it, but this is not the ground, this is not the floor, and it's not the debate in this for us today. But NATO is still wondering what its usefulness since the Cold War, and it will be like this in the near future. And well, probably the answer is a complex one with so many elements to take into account to give a right answer to it.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you. I guess I would like to end on a more optimistic note that whilst institutions, I mean, I'm reflecting on some of the questions are not only in relation to NATO, but the whole structures of our global systems, the legitimacy of the UN Security Council, etc. And I think through work on women, peace and security, one sees that whilst many of these systems remain in place in terms of economic capitalism and, you know, the dominance of Western powers, within institutions like NATO and the Security Council, there have been positive developments. We are seeing talk about gender equality, human security, efforts to consult more with civil society, to include women. So I feel that it's, to me, an endorsement of the change that can follow the activism of civil society organizations and the sort of impacts we see of developments like feminist foreign policy, for example, when in some countries now at the highest levels of government, these ideas around feminist peace and disarmament are beginning to have some effects. So it certainly doesn't, I don't seek to answer in the affirmative that the structures we have are good or the right ones, but to say that I think we do see the potential for positive change and an endorsement of the important role that student activism, academic activism, and the work of community groups and broader civil society can play, that we need to stay engaged and we can't be too downhearted about the potential for change.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pose 4 more questions from the students, and we need to finish with that. We will be over 12:30, which was our attempted time of finishing, but I think it's worth at least making these 4 questions. There is one from Ruben who asked about specific protocols or plans to address LGBTB problems in this, and especially trans folks problems in this conflict resolution, peacekeeping and peace making agenda. Also from, and you know, I'm just launching the questions, and again, I'll give you the floor to each of you so you can answer whatever you prefer. Beatriz asked about what Western countries, if Western countries can really consider themselves peaceful and safe, considering the new concepts that Felix explained at the beginning, what we consider now human security. Then Rafael was making a question about should gender quotas be established, or are there possible and most effective strategies to promote gender equality within UN peacekeeping? Megan has shared some documents about it, but this is a broader question, more in general. And finally, Mar Laschetti asked about, sorry, let me go to the bottom of the question. My question is whether it is possible to talk about peace when we always talk about that in terms of conflict. Is it possible to achieve a truly secure peace while always fearing conflict? Or on the contrary, is it necessary to reconstruct our perception and reassert the moral and ethical premises that we always talk about, but we have no relevance? Okay, this is it from now. I'm really sorry for all the other questions that will remain unanswered, but at least we have a good representation here. Who wants to go first? Felix?
Yes, I'm coming. Okay. Yes, yes, Rodrigo and Beatriz asked a very interesting question, and I'm happy because you have catched what I tried to explain at in my introduction. When we talk about, if we talk about peace and security in its traditional narrow meaning, to the question whether there is peace or security in a given country or in a given region, the answer can be straightforward, yes or no. Because negative peace, national military security alone can be checked on a given situation clearly as a yes or no. There is that country's at war, international, internal war. Well, there is no peace. It's fairly easy. But when we talk about peace and security in those broad meanings of positive peace, human security, then we cannot answer so straightforward. And we cannot answer yes or no. And of course, that applies to Western countries as well. We cannot say that, I don't know, Switzerland, Austria, Spain, Canada, Australia are at peace in terms of positive peace or human security. What we should do is to talk about levels of peace and security. The level of human security in this given country or that given country is higher than in another region or country. That's okay, but not a yes or no answer. For instance, if we have a look at, if we focus our view in the American continent, I ask you the question, is there peace in the American continent? or not? Your answer will be what? The right answer, as normally, as it used to be, should be, it depends. It depends on what meaning of the word peace and security we are using. If we are using the narrow meaning of negative peace, military national security, the answer would be yes. Probably the American continent, from Canada to Argentina and Chile, is the one we can put as an example where there are no wars. If we leave Colombia still outside as an exception. But if we use these terms, peace and security, in its more broader sense, positive peace, human security, of course the answer is no. There's no peace in Mexico. Human security levels in Brazil, in Venezuela, in Colombia, in the United States are so low. In that last country I have mentioned, more than 35,000 people have been killed by weapons last year and the year before, and so and so. More than 30,000 people have been killed by the use of drugs every year since 4, 5, 6 years ago. Is that a country that lives in peace and security? Well, in terms of negative peace, the answer is yes. In terms of military and national security, the answer is yes, of course. But in terms of human security or positive peace, the answer is that its level of peace and security is very low. The same happens in Mexico. Or we can talk about the Northern Triangle of Central America. Hell on earth. Real hell on earth. So yes, you're right. And let me just to finish refer to the other question and trying to connect it with the previous one. That's why when we talk about peace and security in these broader terms of positive peace and human security, we cannot say we have reached the end. We are at the top. No. We should remember Immanuel Kant and his little book, Perpetual Peace. He wrote this title by acknowledging that perpetual peace is a no place, is an utopia. We can try to reach it, but we'll never reach it. Because perpetual peace only exists in cemeteries, as Immanuel Kant tried to explain us. But of course, we can step by step try to approach to that utopia, to that end, even having into account that we'll never reach that perfect situation, because we are human beings. We are human beings, and human beings are free. And while we are free to do good or wrong. We are free to decide whether to act properly or wrongly. And while we manage to have freedom of choice, we'll be free to do things wrongly or not. So at the end of the day, as sometimes it happens, go back to Kant, and Kant shows us the answer, the way. We have to keep on going, but being convinced that we'll never reach the end. That's it.
Thank you very much, Felix. Megan?
Perhaps I'll focus on Ruben's question that highlighted the exclusion of trans people from many international sort of security policy approaches. I think that's a really important point to raise. And it speaks to, I think, a broader recognition that LGBTIQ people more broadly have tended to be excluded from many more mainstream approaches to women, peace and security and human rights. Certainly working within the women, peace and security field, I think there has only really in recent years been a turn towards thinking about queer approaches, the inclusion of LGBTI people, and even now just the beginnings of programs and research that looks at how gay and lesbian people, I mean, a few programs around trans people, but not many, are affected in conflict. I've certainly found it coming up in discussions now with UN agencies where the Department for Peacekeeping, for example, is thinking about, you know, how they react to the insecurities faced by trans communities in the context of UN missions. But this is obviously really sensitive and difficult for them because there isn't, in terms of Ruben's question, there isn't any international plan or protocol that addresses LGBTI issues because, frankly, so many nations are deeply homophobic and transphobic that is conceived as very controversial. Certainly, even in the work that we do with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe and their Human Rights Department, they can work on the human rights of trans people, but they have to be careful not to talk about trans rights because that is somehow seen as unacceptable to some of their participating states, that the level of non-acceptance of the human rights of trans and other LGBTI people is really deeply rooted in, and that affects how international institutions can engage with the issue. I mean, more positively, I think we now see in the UN human rights system much more rigorous and sustained engagement with the human rights of LGBTI people through the work of the Special Rapporteur under the Human Rights Council and some of the other sort of standing mechanisms. And to me, that's a real reminder of some of the really positive, good work done by the UN system and why we need to be careful that in bringing a critique to the UN structures that we don't under-recognize the positive work that is done within the human rights side. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done within humanitarian organizations and security organizations to start thinking about LGBTI issues more holistically across the work we do on security.
Thank you very much, Megan. And now I'm giving the floor to Maria.
Thank you. So I will take the part of the question related to women representation across the UN. It's almost like studying medicine in Spain, like a huge, overwhelming representation of women at university level. But when we go up in sanitary responsibility in hospitals, less and less women are at the top. So it's a little bit similar. If you think what it is like to work in conflict settings where the big majority of UN staff are based, you will immediately know why there are less and less women at the top of the pyramid at SRSG levels, special representative of the Secretary General in the field levels, at HC levels, humanitarian coordinator level, at RR level. So at the very senior levels, there are very few women. Why? Because when you're in your 30s, late 30s, and you went through P2s, P3s, P4s, you did Afghanistan, you did Iraq, and you did South Sudan, then you wonder what is it next? Is it Mali, or is it having a life? We call it having a life, having a family, try to have a family, try to settle down somewhere which for us is more normal. So a lot of the women at that stage quit the UN. or they go to HQ, but the promotion opportunities at HQ are much smaller than when you're in the field. In the field, it's very easy year after year to keep going up. So what happens? You're in the field, you have something called rest and recovery. You work for, depends on the difficulty of the mission, but 40 to 50 days in a row. And then you have to leave the mission area for at least 7 days to rest and recover. And these are called non-family duty stations, where you couldn't even bring a partner. So the personal sacrifices are so huge that whether you're a single woman, whether you're a woman with a partner, with a family, with kids, no matter what the format of your family is like, it's really difficult to keep gaining responsibility the UN and to have a family life if you have to be based in Baghdad, in Kabul, and then in Kinshasa. Most of these places you couldn't bring a family. So that's why even when the UN over the last 10 years has made a huge effort to have women at the most senior level, it's not always easy to find women that want to do it and that want to be there. But there are some exceptions, and there are some women up there as SRSGs doing an amazing work. But that just to let you know, the personal sacrifices are very, very big.
Okay, thank you very much to you all, to you students for your many questions, to you speakers for your bright answers. There are, I think, like in every good debate, we've created more questions than just given answers, but that is the good thing, to keep up your curiosity, to your willingness to keep learning. Of course, I also want to thank again La Universidad Carlos III and the Embassy of the United States in Spain. And just a reminder, 3 reminders, in fact, please join the competition. We are looking forward to getting your proposals, your texts, your videos on any of the topics we've touched upon today. Also, I want to remind you that you can find many articles, many insights, many analyses on all these topics in Esglobal. Go there and you will find many things. And also you will find there more information about this session. You will see the video there posted in a few days, and you will see the program for the coming session. So if you want to join other sessions being organized with other universities, you will be more than welcome. Finally, just again, thank you, Maria, thank you, Megan, thank you, Felix, for your contributions. Thank you, the Universidad and the Embassy, and see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.